What are common attributes and practices that top teams have around the world, whether it is a Formula One Red Bull racing team or an English Premier League team or a Bundesliga team, whether it's a global business brand or a startup that's skyrocketing? What makes them exceptional? In this episode at the People Quotient Leadership Series, I discuss with David Brown, who's worked with most of these teams and shares with them the common practices and traits that makes them distinctive, how they get to the top and stay there. Let's listen in. David, welcome to the People Quotient Podcast. I'm delighted to have you finally after all these years and all this planning. Super stoked to have you here.
It's a real pleasure for me to engage more officially in a conversation that you and I have regularly.
That is correct. And as I was reflecting on our journey, you've been involved with most, if not all, of my pivotal decisions, especially as it relates to career and life. And so, you've been on my journey, or I've had you on my journey for a very long time. And I'm really delighted to bring your insights to my audience, our audience, on leadership, people, high-performing teams. And this is something we've never done before in this podcast. I've never done a series, and I'm really excited to do one with you as the first series, and specifically something that is incredibly important to what you do, but to the people that I work with and the audience that we have. So this is like lots of firsts that are happening. So pretty exciting.
Even more so for me, as you will well know, Rohit. People have asked me many, many times over the years to do a podcast with them. I've never done one. This is the first one that I've done, and I'm doing it because it's you. People have also asked me over the years to write a book, which I've never done. And maybe I'll be inspired by your book writing journey to do one myself as well.
That would be super exciting, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would be like, and thank you for doing this. I know that you are, by design, by choice, very discreet with what you do, and the knowledge that you've accumulated over 4 decades in terms of the practice and how you've brought it to life for a lot of your clients. And so I'm thrilled to have you on. When I was thinking about your background, for anyone who's trying to find you on LinkedIn, don't bother, because that you won't find much, or a website. But knowing what I know about you, you've worked with some unbelievable professionals, unbelievable high achievers around the world, and without naming names, in just categories from sports, whether it's elite level soccer, national level, Bundesliga, EPL, Formula One, golf, to the highest echelons of politics, to Fortune 500, dare I say 100 CEOs, and some incredible founders that have now done phenomenal work. You've had a pretty amazing journey, and I have to believe that it started at some point, not with all of them. You eventually got there, but if you share a little bit about how you got into what is it that you do, because we're going to go into the episodes we're going to talk about, as I mentioned earlier, series. But before we talk about what those episodes are, how do you describe to people what do you do?
That's a great question. I suspect that might be the most difficult question that you throw my way, because many people have asked me over the years, and I find it incredibly difficult to describe, because really all that I do is have conversations with people. That's what it feels like to me, Rohit, right? You and I work together in multiple ways over the years, and all we do really is I have a conversation with you. I find it difficult to describe it in a different way, but I think all of us need a sounding board in our lives, whoever we are. But I think when you are elite in what you do, whether that's in sport or whether that's in the C-suite of a corporate organization, the higher you go, the more elite you become, the lonelier it tends to become. I think you feel less surrounded by people with whom you can have the kind of conversations that being senior and being elite necessitates. And that's when perhaps somebody like me can be a useful foil, a useful sounding board. And that's how I think of what it is that I do. I have conversations with people that it hopefully helps them order their thinking, sort out the noises inside the head, hopefully help to bring clarity to them. I don't bring answers. The answers are already in the heads of the people that I work with. I help them clear the clouds so that the answers reveal themselves. I think that's the best way I can describe what I feel it is that I do.
Yeah, no, I think having worked with you, I understand as the recipient of your thought partnership, and trying to bring clarity in, and I can say for myself, in a very cluttered brain, it is very helpful. And one day I aspire to be, as you described, the elite side of the spectrum. I think I'm working my way. I don't know, hopefully in that direction. But for those that you are working with, as you were describing what you do, the word, not to put things in a box, but what comes to mind is almost like a mental performance coach, somebody who, all these athletes, politicians, executives, they've all got, I'm sure they've got for their, physical performance coaches and other elements of it. But what you, by the sounds of it, comes in is you come in with that to improve, enhance their mental performance so that they can get over or become better at whatever it is that they're doing. Would that be a fair way of thinking about it?
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think if we take the sports world as it's probably the clearest analogy, and then others listening in that live in other worlds can define their equivalent version of this. When I first started working with soccer players, and particularly I would say in Formula One, these are folks that were surrounded by a variety of, let's call them advisors, right? So you had your physical performance coach, you had your skills training, you had your dietary advisor, and so on and so forth. But nowhere was anyone helping these folks work on what goes on in here. Yeah. And I passionately believe that the difference between good and great, and even more so the difference between great and distinctive, is all to do with what goes on in here. I can be the best equipped I can be as a physical specimen, but unless I'm in control of what's going on in here, I'm never going to be at the top of my game. And that's true for me as an individual, and it's true for a group or a team. And that's true both in sport and in other walks of life.
Yeah, I resonate with that, and I think people listening in from other worlds, non-sporting worlds, can also start to. I can imagine the wheels turning already based on what you're saying. But before we go give away all the secrets, I think maybe what we do is, for the audience that have made it this far into the episode, a few minutes in, let's give you a preview of the fact that what the series is about. So what we'll be doing is, given the richness of the content we'll be getting into, we've got 4 episodes. So we've taken the content and broken them into 4 episodes. They'll all be linked. We're going to start with and you're starting to touch on it, high-performing teams. Then peak performing individuals with the second episode. The third episode will be leadership performance. So really, how do leaders who are working with peak performing individuals or wanting to develop them or high-performing teams, what are some of those principles for distinctiveness, as you brought out, in leadership? And then the final bit, we'll wrap it all up with organizational performance. So that brings it all together. And so those listening, whether you're a CEO, a coach, an investor, or somebody leading the community, I think that last episode will be a culmination of all the things we talked through in the first three, and your counsel, advice, and experience of what it takes to build high-performing organization that is made up of great leaders, peak-performing individuals, and obviously high-performing teams. So with that said, that sort of puts out the menu for anyone listening, and let's get right into your topic, which is where you left off around high-performing teams. So a great concept that everybody wants to have. No coach wants to have a mediocre performing team, or a CEO wants to have an average performing team. So I'm sure it's something that everybody comes to you saying, I would like to be in a high performing team, or like to build a high performing team. So when somebody starts that journey with you, or that question, where do you go next with that question?
I hit them with a question of my own.
Okay.
I ask people to think in that circumstance of a team that they identify as being high performing, because I want to understand from them, how are they defining high performing. So I ask them to think. It could be a team that they have been part of. It could be a team that they admire from a distance. It could be a team in their own field of work, or it could be a team in a completely different walk of life. But I ask them to think of that team, and I ask them to think about, in their mind, what makes that team high performing? Why have they chosen that team to use as their own example? What are the behaviours? What are the characteristics? To the extent that they can identify it, what does that team stand for? What are the principles that guide how they operate, and therefore how they perform? And we chat that through. We list it out. We categorise it all. And that becomes our lens. That becomes the lens then through which we look at the team that they may be part of, or that they may be leading, to see if we can identify which of those characteristics and behaviours and so on already exist in that team or not. Where are the gaps?
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful insight to kind of start to self-reflect, to start to uncover for yourself, well, what does make for high performance? That's where I would start the conversation. I would go on, obviously, from there, but that's where I would start it, getting the person themselves to think about, well, what is high performance as I'm thinking about it? And have I got it covered? Or am I missing some really important components in my own definition, in my own understanding of what I'm trying to seek in terms of high performance?
So it's a really good starting point, because I think this sort of goes back to your point about starting to bring clarity on definitions, right? So this is where what you're saying is the journey starts with bringing that clarity, and what you were asking them to do is effectively do benchmarking of what would they benchmark themselves against. And so I can imagine somebody, again, I'll put a CEO hat on or an investor hat on, saying, okay, I have some sports teams that I think are high performing, maybe because they won trophies, or they seem to have a really good team morale, or they really seem to have a lot of success as a team in terms of branding, popularity. So everyone, to your point, everyone will gravitate towards a specific set of variables that they perceive to be a definition of high performing. But they don't know why that is, right? What they don't know is that they know the what, but they don't know the why and the how, right? Which is probably where you end up as your next phase of this discovery. And so when somebody says, okay, I've figured out my variables that make me believe what high performance or high performing looks like, and in a business sense, they're pretty well defined. In a non-business sense, you can identify those. What happens next? How do they go through the discovery path on how do I know if I've got a high performing team? What should I be looking at beyond the metrics? Because sometimes they may say, look, my metrics are not great, which is why I want to become high performing. I know I can be better, or we can be better. So where do you take them next?
Yeah. So So there's a great piece of work that I absolutely live by in the work that I do in high performance. It's a piece of work that was done, that might be familiar to people looking in. A piece of work done by a gentleman called Patrick Lencioni. And now the way that Lencioni frames his work in this area is he looks at what are the things missing from teams that make them less than high performing. That's the angle with which he approaches the work. I look at it the other way around. It's exactly the same, but I come from the other angle, which is what are the things that all high performing teams have?
Yeah.
Now, Lencioni frames it in literally in terms of a pyramid, and with the base being the entry point to getting on the high performance pyramid, high performance ladder, and each component moving up to the pyramid allows the next level to become possible. And there are 5 components in there. So when I've spoken to people about identifying for themselves a team that they believe is high performing from the outside looking in, and we talk about all of those components, I then give them this framework. And it's interesting to see the words may not be the same, but many of the fundamentals that they've identified will appear in Lencioni's pyramid. But there's usually 1 or 2 that don't. And that's typical. That's indicative of the fact that that's why there are few high-performing teams out there. Because until you understand the components, you can't become high-performing.
Yep.
But this is an important start of the journey, right? Understanding what the fundamentals are so that you can then say, and when I get teams together, whether it be a senior corporate team or whether it be a sports team, I ask them, when we've gone through this process, to identify where do they believe this team that they are part of is at in terms of the Lencioni pyramid. And that's super important, Rohit, as well, because they know the day-to-day life in that team better than anybody. They are the best to ask that question of. And allowing them to see where each other feels they are in terms of their journey to high performance is really important, because that becomes the starting point for the work that they will need to do in order to get to the top of the pyramid. And the starting point may be very different for different teams. Some teams are not even on the pyramid yet, right? They don't even appear. I very often draw it up and ask them to put a sticker on, right? And sometimes the sticker doesn't even appear. It's on the floor because they've not even made it there yet. But it's a very, very powerful framework to order your thinking. But even more than that, it's not just a framework that stays on the page. It's a framework that you can then use in practice, because once you've figured out your starting point, you can then start to examine what are the practicalities, what are the behavioral shifts, what are the mindset changes that we're going to need in order to become more high performing than we currently are.
I think, look, I have to believe that the team, as they're going through this exercise, there are people like sort of looking around and saying, "Oh, hang on, are we on that? Are we on the pyramid or not?" And there may be disagreements between people saying, "Well, I don't think we're quite there yet," and that in itself probably is quite revealing in the process. And then the team leader, whether you're a CEO or whether you're a coach or the manager, whatever the title you play, that might be a pretty massively revealing thing for them as well to observe and identify. So I can imagine how powerful this exercise can be for a lot of people within the team, managing the team, outside looking in. But as a team, does that often lead to just the fact that you take them through this exercise? Does that lead to an almost alignment of misalignment? Is that the first place where you sort of say, you know what, we're all aligned that we're misaligned, or am I reading too much into it?
No. I think there are a variety of outputs, right, from undertaking this exercise, and that's why it's a powerful exercise to do, because we need to understand within a team, where do we see ourselves, right? And if we see ourselves in a different place, that's material, right? We need to figure that out. Why is that? Why are you seeing us on one part of the pyramid when I'm seeing us on a different area?
Yeah.
That's important. And a lot of it is about then how are we defining the different words that form the concepts within that pyramid, right? We may have a very different definition. You may think we have established ourselves at a certain level because you're defining the words that you're seeing in a different way to that with which I'm defining it. And that's material, right? That's material. We've got to have a common understanding in order to move forward together. So, and that very often happens, that people will see the team at slightly different places to one another within that team. That's quite common. It also happens where there is absolute alignment across the team on where they see themselves. They are very clear on what their starting point is, usually defined by what their issue is, if I can put it that way. Or we don't have any of that in the team, and there's universal agreement on it. That's our sticking point, and we've really got to do some work on that before we give ourselves a chance to move up the pyramid.
This may be an unfair question, but you know me, I'm gonna ask for numbers, or at least so if you just gut feel over the years, what percentage of teams fall into that last bucket that we're aligned on whatever the things that we need to work on? Like roughly, how many, for those listening in, like say, oh, do I make it into that cut?
So where they're totally aligned as a team on where they think they.
Yeah, even if that they know that there's work to be done, but there is alignment in the group pretty quickly that, oh yeah, we're on this pyramid. Here's where we're at. Here are the
Right.
issues, and so there's this clarity on where they all are at that point in time.
Yeah, I would say total alignment is probably 40%.
Oh wow,
Total
that's higher
alignment.
than I thought.
But actually minimal variation, right? So within 2 steps of the pyramid, most people are. You see, if you give people the chance to talk about this kind of stuff, and you give them a framework that they can hang their thoughts on, as it were, the teams know when they're performing and when they're not performing. And if you give them the language to understand what makes for high performance, they're pretty good at self-identifying. You know, the great news for CEOs out there, if we're talking about the corporate world, the great news for CEOs is if they have the desire to invest in their team, in this area of work, they can, and they do, in my experience, make massive strides towards high performance, because there is awareness out there in teams, but without the setting with which to discuss and work on that awareness, you're wasting it, right? But if you allow your team and you join them on the journey of exploring that and giving them the opportunity of defining it and working towards high performance, the results are massive in my experience.
Yeah. No, I'm very encouraged to hear that 40% have got higher degrees of alignment, because I would have thought the number would have been a lot lower. But then the second piece that you're referring to, which is, um, you know, it is important to have that awareness. So I think there, if I was simplistically to taking what you've said so far, is that there is a large percentage of the population that may not be aware where they are as a team, and then some that are highly aware but maybe misaligned, and then some who are aware and aligned, right? So that's that 40% cohort. And so the question really comes down to is, as a leader, the first thing, what your counsel to CEOs or investors listening in, or anyone, quite frankly, in leadership role is, how well do you think your team is aligned on where they are in that journey to peak performance, to high performance, right? I think that increased, because as I have come across in different facets of business where CEOs wish to believe that they have a high performing team. And so sometimes it leads to false precision, inaccuracies, made up stories. And I think that's a big sort of aha when that happens. And then this exercise. And then there are people who are also very harsh on their teams. And so then there is the other end of it, which is the team may be very high performing, but the leadership wants to, create this stretch goals or create this notion of, no, we're not quite there yet. And so in both cases, there's an actual tension and strain, I have to imagine, that further feeds into this equation. So there is awareness. The question is, which end of the spectrum do teams fall when this awareness comes about? Is that an interesting way to think about it, or do you have a different perspective?
No, I think it's a good way of thinking about it, and I think it ties back to the first question that you asked me, which is, what's the starting point when a CEO reaches out to me and asks me about high performance and is trying to figure it out for their own team, understanding the definition, right? What is high performance? What are the components that we know all high-performing teams possess?
Yeah.
And that's important, because otherwise, how can you possibly define whether you have a high-performing team or not, unless you know what all the components are? Yeah. Even if you know some of them, that's not enough. Yeah. Having that framework becomes super powerful, and it really jumps off the page. It is not a kind of abstract theoretical framework in the classical sense that many things are, especially in the field of personal and team development. Why I like Lencioni so much and have so much respect for the guy is this really is translatable into practice. You can see whether or not the team is displaying the behaviors that are necessary to move up that pyramid of performance. And of course, if you're not seeing the behaviors, then you know there's a mindset issue, because a behavior will only ever follow a mindset.
So let's get into it, David. I'm sure the audience is like, all right, guys, come on, let's.
What the hell's on the pyramid?
Yeah,
they might have already left and gone and looked it up, by now.
Yeah, probably, which is good. And so why don't we get into it? So what are those 5 steps or 5 layers of the pyramid that, and where would you start?
Yeah. So it'd be interesting how people who are listening in have maybe started to try and think about what some of the components would be. Right at the base, well, let me start off actually at the top. Where are we heading to? What's at the very top of the pyramid? What's the purpose of all this? The purpose of any team is to produce results.
Yep.
So one of the other reasons why I like this framework so much is it's not fluffy, right? This is not about having all sorts of nice things to create a nice existence for a team. This is about producing results. Whether that's hitting your bottom line, whether that's maximizing your profits, whether that's hitting your targets, whether that's winning a championship, whether about it's winning a cup, whatever it is, a team exists to produce results. And the definition of producing results will vary depending on the business that you're in, the walk of life that you're in, and so on. But where we're heading to is high-performing teams produce and go beyond the results that they've set for themselves as an expectation.
Yep.
So that's where we're heading to. Now, what's the sequence of behaviors, the sequence of events that we know all high-performing teams have in order to get to that result level that they've set for themselves, or even exceed it? At the bottom of the pyramid, the most fundamental is trust. The members of that team must have absolute trust in and of one another. Mm-hmm. Now, it sounds obvious. It's a little word, right? So it sounds easy. It's the most fundamental. It's the most difficult to achieve in most teams. Think about what having trust means in practice. Right? You've got to let go. You've got to get out of your own head. You've got to get out of your own ego. You've got to get out of your perhaps desire to shine. Yeah. And you've got to get alongside a colleague. You've got to get alongside somebody else. And it's difficult for a number of reasons, not least because if you think about what do we spend our time together doing? Let's take a corporate team. A good corporate team, senior team, will come together for operational reasons. Mm-hmm. Because there are decisions, immediate, short-term decisions to make in order for the business to run, to thrive. Good teams come together for operational reasons. Better teams also come together for strategic reasons. So this is getting out of the day-to-day. This is getting out of the weeds. This is looking ahead. This is looking 3 years, 5 years, maybe sometimes 10 years from now. Where do we want to be as an organisation? What is that going to take? How does that inform some of our operational decisions when we come together? So good teams come together for operational reasons. Better teams come together for operational and strategic reasons. The very best teams, the high-performing teams, come together for a third reason. And that's what I define as team health. They come together for no purpose other than to build connectivity, to deepen awareness of one another, to work on things that are purely about how do we operate as a team? Where are we doing well? Not from a business performance perspective, from a team performance perspective. Where are we doing well? Where are we not doing so well? What is it that's allowing us to do well? What are the behaviours that we're displaying? Where are we not doing well, and what's getting in the way? What's happening there? All of this kind of team investment is about building trust. It is an ongoing process. So the very best teams, the ones that give themselves the chance of high performance, are consistently developing trust within themselves because they accept and they believe that, as Lencioni would tell us, it is the most fundamental step. Without it, you can forget the rest of the journey to high performance. You're never going to get there. Yeah. This is the one to invest in because it releases the possibility of everything else that follows to the top of that pyramid.
Yeah. No, that, yeah, and as you were saying, I was taking notes, but also reflecting simultaneously on how important that trust element is, and it sort of applies to any team really, whether it's
Yes.
a small team of three or a company of 30,000, doesn't really matter. I think trusting the person that is next to you in that conference room, on team room, on the sports field, the cross-functional players that are all across the hallway, whether it is the back office or the front of sales, whatever it is, that you've got to have that, the teams that I'm reflecting on, that do well. And one thing I will say is that when that trust happens, I can think of situations when that result at the top of the pyramid has been achieved or surpassed. And there are teams I can think of who had moments of trust where it just worked like magic. But then, as you say, if you don't continue working on it, continuing to build that connective tissue, it disappears and
Yes.
something else comes in the way. And then it goes back to more of the strategic or the tactical, which is let's finish the project. And it's extremely goal oriented, but it's not building that longer term connective tissue, which is, I think, what you're getting at.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is not just building high performance for the moment.
Yeah.
This is about building high performance in perpetuity.
Yeah.
This is about sustaining the ability to be high performing.
Yeah.
This is about heading in the sports analogy. This is about, I don't just want to win one title, I want to win several. I don't just want to reach the top, I want to stay there.
Yeah.
Right? So can you build high performance fleetingly? Yes. But wouldn't you rather build high performance that can be sustained? I think that's the goal, that's the ambition that we should have for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it ties back to something, I coach and I work, when I'm working with my clients in private equity or otherwise, is that long-term value creation, right? So thinking about that long-term picture requires you to think about a high-performing team that stays with you throughout that long term. Now, the people will come and go. That's natural. But as a leader, when you're thinking about this, I think to your point, those who succeed consistently over time are the ones who invest in the fabric, in that connective tissue, which is that third element. And the leadership team has to think that way, because that's what they're going to bring into the table. And so you could have, someone listening saying, well, you know what, this year I just want to make budget. And to your point is, you could probably pull together a team that trusts themselves enough to make that happen this one time, and that's okay. But have you really created long-term enterprise value? Probably not. Right?
Yes.
If anything, what might happen is that, and this goes back to what you're saying about athletes who want to win consecutively. Maybe it's not the first year or the second year that the team has really tried, but you sort of say, you know what, you can see the momentum build. And often we hear that in sports teams,
Yes.
that, oh, the team is building. You can see the signs that they're starting to get on that curve. And voila, like, year 3, 4, 5, trophies, championships. Like, you kind of go, how did that happen? Well, it didn't happen in that year. It actually
Yes.
happened multiple years prior, right? And,
Yeah.
and and you could probably speak to specific teams that you've worked with where you've seen that evolution happen, where the investment was made many, many years ago, but specifically to your point about that connective tissue, and then the results kept coming.
Yes.
Is there something? Is there a team that comes to your mind when you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting because there's a potential crossover phase happening now. So if I think of Formula One, Red Bull Racing, a team that I work with, and Sebastian Vettel, a driver that I worked with. Seb was a 4-time world champion.
Yep.
That didn't just happen. The journey to him becoming a 4-time world champion didn't even begin in the year that he won his first title. It began way before that.
Yeah.
Because you're building a Lencioni pyramid in practice. That's literally what was happening at Red Bull. That pyramid was forming, and each step on that pyramid was forming and evolving and being reworked on, that resulted in the success that the team had over that particular 4-year period. You see the same thing happening in Formula One now at McLaren. McLaren are on a very, very similar journey to the one that I remember at Red Bull. Very, very similar journey. It's about getting the right people in place, but putting people in place doesn't create a team. It creates a group of people. There are two processes, right, that need to happen together. We want the right people, but then we've got to build a team. And really what we've been talking about and using Lencioni to highlight is the formation and the building of a team and turning a group of people into a team. And you see now the fruits starting to appear on the McLaren tree, just as it did with Red Bull all those years ago. And, the point that McLaren had to go through, if I use them as the most recent example, they brought the people in, a journey that's still continuing, by the way. Great. They really started to invest in ways of operating to deepen awareness of this new group of people amongst themselves in order to develop trust.
Yep.
And it starts at the top and it cascades down. What they then needed to do, because the actual function of the team was not good. The setup, the structure, is why McLaren had been struggling for a number of years. The second most successful team in Formula One history, but really, really was struggling. And one of the reasons they were really struggling is they weren't having the right conversations. There were some difficult conversations that they needed to have to make key fundamental changes in order to give themselves the chance of being high performing. Yeah. And this is the second lesson that we get from Lencioni. What trust allows you to do is it allows you to have difficult conversations. It allows you to deliberately invite conflict into the team.
Interesting.
Why would you deliberately invite conflict? Why on earth would you do that? Because you've got to have honest conversations. And that means we're going to have different points of view. And we may disagree. And we may disagree violently. But if we're in an environment of trust, if I believe and trust that you have the best intentions for this team at your heart, and you believe and trust the same of me, then there is no fear in conflict.
Yeah.
There is no concern at facing and having a difficult conversation, because we believe we have the best interests of this team at heart, because we trust each other to be coming from that point of view. Now, if you take trust out of that equation, difficult conversations and conflict become quite fearful. And it's why most teams run away from difficult conversations. Because fundamentally they know that trust isn't in place. So trust is a nice thing to have, of course, but it's vital. It has a real purpose because it releases our ability to have the kinds of conversations that we're going to need to have on our journey to high performance. The journey is not an easy one. Difficult decisions will have to be made, but we do that together, unified in our purpose as a team, and we can do that if we have trust in place. So now you start to see that the powerful first two steps and how one releases the other. Trust allows us to have difficult conversations, allows us to invite conflict into the room, because that allows us to make the right kind of decisions because we've had an honest conversation.
And just stepping back on trust for those listening, one question that I have on their behalf is, hey, David, that how do I know in my team the level of trust? So there's a scale of 0 to 10. 10 is like everyone's very trusting. Do I need to, two-part question, do I need to get to 10, for this trust foundation to be strong? Or can I be happy or content? Can I progress through the pyramid at a 7 or 8 or 9, whatever that means? And I'm using numbers only because I can't help myself quantify things. And then the second piece is, how do I know where am I on that trust? Is that when you get into these? Is it more of a reflective thing? Is when you do have conflict and you realize that it's leading to unhealthy outcomes? That's when you know that you don't have trust? Or is there a different way before you get into some sort of conflict that you will have confidence as a leader that, hey, look, you know what, I trust that my team and I can get into these sticky situations and work ourselves out? So two-part question.
Yeah, so on the numbers, because I know you're a numbers man, you always like to come to the numbers. Why wouldn't you aim for as high a number as possible, right? Yeah. Is it likely to be a 10? Probably not, because we're human, so we're not perfect, right? So if I was putting a number on it, I would say, you know what, if we were at 8 or above and fluctuating from 8 upwards and back to 8 and up and back and up and back, I'd be super comfortable with that. Yeah. How do I know if there's trust in the team? Yeah. I would say it's because we are having difficult conversations. It's because there is an element of conflictual debate in the room. When there's an absence of those things, it's because I don't trust the people in the room enough to be able to raise that topic. I don't feel able to speak up or to speak out. Yep. So it's more the absence of those kind of conversations that would make me think, something's not right here. Interesting. But then I go back to what I was saying before, Rohit, which is one of the things that high-performing teams do is they come together with a certain rhythmical approach to spend time on team health. Yeah. Because that's your check-in point, right? That's with that rhythm in place, not only are you making sure that you have this as a topic, but it's your moment before time elapses for too long. It's your moment to be able to raise, as a team, issues or concerns that may be getting in the way of trust.
Yeah. It's interesting what I'm reflecting on is that, there are situations where conflict arises because you have an environment where there is high speed to action. So I think about in a medical world, right, where, if you're working in an emergency department, by definition, it is chaotic, and there's a lot at stake. And so there are high pressure situations where there's conflict, but that doesn't mean that, no, in that scenario you better trust people around you, but that doesn't mean that there is trust. And then similarly, when I think about the world of finance, specifically whether you're an operator or an investor, disagreements happen because there are very vocal, egoic parties that may be around the table, which doesn't necessarily lead me to think that that's a sign of trust. If anything, I think from my experience that has often eroded trust, that I'm not sure if what you've got the best interests of the company here versus I hear your voice come through as something is in it for you. And so
Yes.
I think what you're saying is, absent those things in scenarios where there is healthy conflict, that's part A, just sort of saying, hey, look, first of all, healthy conflict means that you're pushing the boundaries, where you're actually getting up against your value system versus someone else's. So that's the only way to uncover,
Yes.
is there trust or not. And then second thing you're saying is that it's not about specific instances. The teams that are high performing teams that make it to the top of the pyramid and stay at the top are the ones that proactively come back to evaluate this concept of trust and how they deal with conflict. So yes, there is ongoing, but there's also a post-mortem type work done reflecting on things. Is that the right way to? So it's two things that you just said that
Yeah.
come together.
I think that's absolutely right. I think
Yeah.
that's a very nice description of what I'm describing. It's a constant and a desired work in progress, always.
Yeah.
Um, One of the mechanisms that can very often be super helpful for teams to be able to do this comes from, we hear a lot of talk about culture. Like, what is the culture of the organisation? What is the culture of the team? And I hear a lot of, I go into a lot of organisations and I hear them using this language, and I sit there, I watch and I observe, and I think they have no clue what that actually means. It's a great word to use, right? And it's become one of the latest buzzwords. But what does it actually mean? Culture is the intersection between values. So that's the things that we believe as a team, that we want to stand for as a team. And norms. That's the behaviours. The behaviours that we want to display and hold ourselves accountable to as a team. Now, the norms part of your values makeup can be super powerful and helpful in what we're talking about in terms of high performance. Because if you can define for yourselves as a team, what are the behaviours that are indicative of trust, that are indicative of the kind of conversations that we want to have as a team as we think about our journey to high performance. If you can define those as part of your team norms, that gives you a template that you can then bring into your team health conversations and hold one another accountable to. We said we were going to live by these team norms. We said we were going to display these kind of behaviours because we believed they were enabling behaviours for us to build and maintain trust, for us to be able to have those challenging conversations that we know we're going to need to have.
Yeah.
I don't think we're doing that at the moment. And I want to put that thought on the table. I don't see us doing this. Rohit, I don't see you doing this. What are we going to do about that as a team? Right?
Yeah.
So it becomes one of those difficult conversations in and of itself, but it's a mechanism through which you can collectively joint accountability, which we'll come on to later with Lencioni. It allows you to have that joint accountability. How are we going to hold ourselves and each other to the standards that we want to set because we know those are the behaviors that are going to build and maintain trust, allow us to have difficult conversations, allow us to be unfearful of conflict, and catapult us on our journey to high performance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the thing that you said, which resonates with me. I mean, all of it does, but the one thing that stands out is the point around values, because I think there are a lot of companies and people and leaders who have written values and spoken values, but I think there is a difference between those and what you're describing, which is practiced values.
Yes.
And I think that's what comes to mind, which is there's a again, just like culture, the other thing that another buzzword that goes around is our values, and you kind of sit there and go, I've not, I've been in meetings in different formats of my life where I'm like, we talk about them, but I never see them being practiced. And
Yeah.
I think I want to double click on that for a second. Is that I think what you're describing is, culture as a output with practiced values and norms, so that otherwise it actually creates conflict because there is misalignment in what those values really are. And then
Yes.
you've got the top of the people in the top of the pyramid, not Lanciani, the organizational stack, the leaders of the organization, not exhibiting certain values that they're expecting others to demonstrate. And
Yes.
it creates this, so there is a false sense of conflict in that regard. So I think what
Yes.
you're saying is that, hey, look, conflicts, just because you've got to be coming at it from an aligned perspective, otherwise it's genuinely a conflict that we should resolve. And I
Right.
think that goes like, you're no longer at the pyramid. You've fallen below the trust barrier.
You're way out.
And you're not
Yeah.
even
You've not even made it onto the chart at all. Right.
there.
Yeah. I think a bad situation is for an organisation or for a team not to have any values at all.
Yeah.
A worse situation is for an organisation or team to have a set of values, but that they don't live by.
Yeah.
That's much worse, right?
Yes.
So the obvious though it may sound, but I'm going to say it anyway because so many organisations I see out there don't do this, is you've got to keep your value. You don't want 10 values. You want 3 or maybe 4, right?
Yeah.
I can't keep myself true to 10 values. I know I can't. So why organisations think that however many people they've got working for them can live by 10 values, I don't know.
Yeah.
Keep your values short, keep them simple, and make sure you've got a common understanding, common definition of what those values are.
Yeah.
But even
Yeah.
all of that is only a starting point, Rohit, right? Because then they become, that's an espoused value. For that to translate into a value in action, you've got to keep one another honest about that. You've got to be able to challenge behaviours that fall outside of those values. And you can do that most powerfully when trust exists.
Yeah.
That's why it's such a fundamental concept. It's such a fundamental behaviour to have, because it allows so much else to happen as a result. And it's in the so much else that high performance emerges.
No, I love it, and I think you're starting to get into this point, and you mentioned accountability, but with this conflict and ability to have conflict, and then through that, I can imagine that people are able to then have alignment, right? They can say, okay, now that we're able to have this conflict, the output of that, so there's trust, there's ability to have difficult conversations and
Yeah.
manage conflict, and then what happens?
Yeah, well, it's exactly as you described. Lencioni uses the word commitment.
Okay.
If we have trust and we're able to have honest and open, sometimes difficult conversations, sometimes we have to journey through conflict. But when we come through the other side of that, what we are able to do is to commit. We commit to a decision. We commit to an outcome. And Lencioni is smart here. He uses the word commitment rather than alignment very deliberately, because teams that don't go through the trust, difficult conversation, maybe conflict steps, what they end up with is consensus. And consensus is so different to commitment, right? Yeah. So different. Consensus is where we pick a middle ground as close as we can to, I think this, you think that, and we pick something somewhere in the middle. And more often than not, consensus leads us to a decision that actually nobody in the room agrees with.
Yeah, it's true.
It takes us to an answer that was actually never surfaced in the room at all in the first place. But it's just the middle ground of this disparate range of views, points of view.
It's almost like a compromise.
It's a compromise is another word for consensus. It's a business killer. It's never the right answer. But if we can get to commitment, which is through the steps that we've been discussing so far, what that means is we are all going to leave that room and we are going to enact that decision. When we leave a room as a result of consensus, what tends to happen, and this will probably raise a smile amongst people that are listening in right now, because they'll recognize it, people leave the room and say, yeah, I know we reached that consensus, but I'm not going to be doing that in my department.
Yeah.
Right? But that happens time and time again, right? Time and time again in business, I see that. So the trust, the conversation, the conflict, in order to reach commitment, because then I know that I'm going to go away and enact that. And I also trust that so are my colleagues. And that then becomes the really powerful step between what we have as a team, trust, what we're then able to do as a team, have honest conversations, and what we're then going to go away and translate into actual decisions and behaviours. And that's the fundamental stepping stone between the conditions of the team and what we then do in order to take business decisions.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful, because the thing that, as you were saying, I was going through all the teams where I've sort of, wondered why a collection of very smart people, highly motivated, never got to peak performance, or I wouldn't call ourselves high performing teams. And I think fundamentally it's all the layers that you just described. I think there was trust issues. There's obviously conflict management, and to your point about commitment versus consensus. Often when I look at those teams, there's a one person calls the shots, and I think whether it's ego or whether it is power, which is another form of ego, I think led to everyone else giving in, which is essentially another version of getting to a consensus. And there was perceived commitment, but there was no buy-in. And I think the other word that leaders often use when they talk about finding commitment is like, are people bought into it? And so where your counsel is, without the first two ladders of the pyramid, the steps of the pyramid, getting to commitment is very difficult and often leads to a form of consensus, which rarely, leads to anything good, especially long term, but even in the short term, right?
Yeah, it will lead to a suboptimal result.
Yeah, and I think it would also lead
suboptimal doesn't lead to high performance, right?
No, not at all. And I think the other risk that I would highlight from a practical operator perspective is I've seen when that has happened, you lose good people. And when you lose good people, you no longer even have a team, forget high performing team, right? And so retention loss or attrition of talent, which is one of the biggest issues that most CEOs and investors face, is an absolute, forget, project killer, company killer, right? And at that point, there's no, you've got to go back to the drawing board and you're off the pyramid all over again. Because the thing that, as you were describing all of these elements, the thing that comes to mind is often when you add a new member of the team, whether it's at the senior level or the mid level or the junior level, changes the dynamic. So if the pre-existing team, and then you can probably speak to it from sports perspective, whether it's football, soccer, or Formula One, if you don't have the pre-existing team have that trust, agreed upon practiced values, and then have that ability to manage conflict, somebody coming in can get lost. Whereas if you already have that, then it becomes a lot easy to onboard someone, of course learn from them, but then they can be part of the fabric rather than, hey, the whole chemistry has shifted. And I've got
Yes.
to believe that that further leads to commitment issues. And then beyond that, I think you were talking about a few minutes ago the point around accountability, right? People start to say, well, hang on, that wasn't me, it was someone else. And is that where you end up as the next big
Yeah.
piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to touch on that point, every time a person in a team changes, that's a new team,
Yeah.
right? So if I think of the football team, right, and if we just think of the team on the pitch, right, so the 11 players, forget about the subs and the broader squad. If we just think of it in as simple terms as possible, if a football team is 11 people, when one of those people leaves and a new person comes in, that's only 1 out of 11, but that's now a new team.
Yeah.
So it's not just that the dynamics change, the fundamental changes, that's a new team. So the work that you've done before, you now need to double down on that, because you have a rogue element, as it were, that's come into the team. So that needs work. These things don't just happen.
Yeah.
And that's why, going way back in our conversation, I was talking about building for sustainability, the sustainability of high performance, rather than just transient high performance. And that's important as a concept in and of itself, in my view. But it also speaks to the fact that teams evolve, teams change, the makeup of teams change, whether that's in sport or in business. That's just the nature of the world. So having this long-term view as a member of, and particularly as a leader of a team, is fundamental. Because if you've established those practices, it doesn't matter when the team changes. That's not a threat to your high performance anymore, because you have these fundamentals and this rhythmical approach to looking after and nurturing those fundamentals, that the transient nature of teams is no longer a threat to you. That you can cope.
I'd add one more thing to that, which is I think it makes it a lot easier to identify the new talent that you're about to or need to bring in, because of the fact that now you've already got the foundation. It's like, what else can I add, to your point, to make a new team that is even more high performing or higher performing to reach that outcome. So it brings more clarity, because you already have clarity to begin with. And then now you're very crystal clear that what am I missing in this equation that will fundamentally change the game? Is that something you've seen happen in whether it's business or sports as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, I think it does two things. I think it does exactly what you've just described, but it also helps with something that you mentioned before, which is about the retention of what you consider to be your top talent.
Yeah.
Right? That is a much easier thing to do if if that top talent is existing in a team that is nurturing itself in this high performance way, right?
Yeah.
You can retain top talent better. You can attract top talent better. You can develop your talent better. So this is why I always come back to the phrase: this is not just it's not a nice to have, right? Yeah. As a leader, spending time on this has huge positive payback for you, not just in terms of performance, where Lencioni would take us to the top of the pyramid, results, but in that other sphere that occupies so much time in a leader's mind, which is, how the hell do I retain my top talent? How the hell do I develop talent? How the hell do I attract talent? It starts to take care of itself if you're nurturing the right kind of things, and these are the right kind of things.
And this, for those listening, this is a great way to just sort of reflect on the series. That's why we've got the series the way we've got, is, we're gonna dive deeper into that high performing talent. What does that look? How do you identify, and all of those things, retain, develop, build? Because just because you've got them doesn't mean the journey ends. It's actually sometimes a leader's job the heart of heart is to actually motivate and develop. And you said earlier, from good to great to distinctive. And so, and then the second piece you sort of highlighted is also the leadership elements, some of the challenges that leaders have from trying to be a good leader to a distinctive leader, and some of it is tied to that. So, just wanted to pause there for those listening to say, hey, look, that is why we're going to come to that in the next few episodes. But going back to your point about high performing teams, I think where we left off, and my apologies for taking us down a tangent, but I tend to do that. Going back to the Lencioni pyramid, I think where we were was around accountability, that we had the commitment, and now you're able to drive accountability. Is that, I think, where you were at before?
And that exactly, and that's the last piece that sits between commitment and the top of the pyramid, which is results. It's the notion of joint accountability. But what Lencioni very cleverly throws in as an additional word in that tier is joint accountability and ownership. You own the decisions. You own them jointly and severally. And you're able to do that because you've made a commitment, not reached a consensus. And it's that stage that allows you then to circle back, right? When you think things aren't happening in the right way, when you feel there isn't joint accountability and ownership, we come back down the pyramid. We need to have a conversation. We need to have a conversation about that. If I don't feel that's happening in this team, I have an obligation to raise a conversation within the team about that. And I can do that, and it can be received by the team because we have trust. This is not me having a go at you, Rohit, right? This is not me criticizing you per se. This is not me trying to politically position myself as being a better team member than you. It would be, or it could be perceived as that if we didn't have trust. But because we've got trust, I'm able to do that, and the rest of the team is able to receive that, safe in the knowledge that my intention is because I want the best for the team, not because I'm trying to position myself. And you then start to see the fluidity of this pyramid in practice. Why each component, and the deeper you go in the pyramid, the more, I may put it this way, the more important the component is, because it's that releases the rest of the pyramid, which moves us towards our high performance.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'll on behalf of those listening, the question that comes up is when you talk about ownership, right? Owning the decision. There are some decisions that are the right and privilege and responsibility of the person at the top of the food chain. And so, and often and I think about smaller businesses where, you've got the CEO who is a founder and owns the entirety of the business, right? They have all the decision rights. They've always had the decision rights. And so the team members that they have brought on over the years, and the business is doing really well and all of that stuff, but the team members that they've brought on, they would also say, hey, look, I trust the person, I trust what they do, I can tell him or her that they've got these issues, so I can sort of somehow justify my way to this level of the pyramid, but I'm not responsible for the decisions because it's not my decision to make. um, I never have been given the privilege to make such a decision. I'd love to, but I don't. And I think, is that something common that you have heard as well from people, obviously not at the top of the pyramid in terms of the organizational stack, but people in middle management saying, "Hey, I'd love to agree with you, David, but what what if I'm not allowed to make a decision? How can I feel ownership? And is that by design, given our discussion on Lencioni, then tell that person and the organization that there is lack of trust in the system, and therefore we can never be a high performing team?"
Yeah, so I think it depends. I think my answer will depend on as you described, that person. It depends where that person sits, right, within the organisation. So if that person is part of this team that we're describing, then they absolutely should be involved in the decision-making process, right? That doesn't mean that I'm necessarily a decision maker, but I can be involved in the decision-making process. This is fundamentally important. And it becomes even more important when you reach out beyond that senior team. There'll be some things that the CEO decides. There'll be some things that the CEO, in combination with investors, decides. There'll be some things that the top team as a whole decides. Okay, but it's highly likely that people outside of that team won't be the decision makers at all.
Yeah.
But
No, that's a good.
but Rohit, here's the important point: they are the enactors of those decisions.
Yeah.
You need those people as an organisation to enact those decisions in order to produce business performance. So the question for a CEO, for a senior team, how do we engage people?
Yeah.
They might not be decision makers. Is there a possibility of us engaging them in the decision-making process? Sometimes yes. Okay, are we doing it? Sometimes no.
Yeah.
So how do we engage? But we're now reaching out beyond the team, and we're talking about the organisational team, within which sits the senior team, the top team, the executive team, however you define it in your own organisation. But being engaged in the decision-making process, which is different to being a decision maker, is really important because you're seeking the feeling of ownership. Because when I own something, I'm going to enact it. If I don't feel ownership over something, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, and I think we'll come to that in the leadership episode as well, because one of the common questions that I engage with CEOs on is that how do I translate my decisions and that of my executive team to the production floor, for example, right? Because they're obviously not going to be involved in the decision making or the process, but they need to understand the decision and why that decision is. And I think so often my conversation is like, it's a translation element. You've got to be able to translate it in a way that is received and understood, because one is, you have to your point, have that connective tissue. And so the question that you're asking is that, do you have that connective tissue, those
Yes.
mechanisms, those opportunities? And then two is, once you do, how are you communicating, right? And so we'll discuss more of that in the leadership episode, because it is a fundamental point around and a struggle for a lot of CEOs saying, hey, look, I'd love to have a lot of people in the room, but first of all, I've got to make the decisions because there is an expediency element to it. But I think
Of
what you're
course.
coaching is decision making can be quick, but if people are not bought in, if there is no commitment, the execution implementation will be very slow, if at all. And so what's the point in making a very quick decision
Yes.
if nobody is bought into it? So,
You
so you've
know,
kind of
Rohit,
wasted the
one of
energy.
my key phrases on the subject of leadership, and I know we'll come to this on a future episode, but it reminds me of it here. One of my key phrases on leadership is, it's hard to lead if nobody is following.
That's true.
Right? And it speaks to exactly what you've just described. Yes, the leader or the leadership team will very often make the decision. The decision can be very quick. How you translate that decision into your organization is fundamental in terms of whether you are getting followership. And if you're not getting followership, you can make the greatest decisions in the world. But if they're not being enacted, they're useless.
Absolutely. And I think I won't distract us down that path anymore, because I've done enough of that in this conversation. But I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. And I think the thing that I come back to is what you were highlighting before, which was the roles people play on teams, right? So now that you've got, you touched on it very briefly, that you've got the pyramid. Let's say everyone listening say, okay, I can make my way through it, or I can do things differently. But I think what you were highlighting there, before, David, was that just because someone is somewhere else in an organizational stack, just because they don't have the title, doesn't mean that they can't be part of the process, or they can't play a pivotal role in helping the team make and live and execute those decisions. Is that a fair way of summarizing what you were trying to get at earlier?
Yeah, I think there are, alongside the categories that we've described, that are released, as Lencioni describes it, off the basis of trust. There are certain roles, there are certain behavioural roles, behavioural contributions that we also know exist in all high-performing teams. And they don't just exist, but they are valued. Many teams will have some of these behavioural roles. Some teams will have all of them. But it's only when those roles are recognised and valued, as well as being present, that a team has the chance to be high performing. This comes from work that was done by a gentleman called David Cantor. Cantor was a systems dynamicist. And a team is a system, right? A team is a system. So amongst many other areas, this was one of the areas that he focused on. And his work is it's actually quite fascinating. And I have a lot of fun, actually, with teams that I work with when we talk about these roles. The smiles and the nods and the glances across the room are quite palpable when they hear these different roles described. Because, again, a bit like Lencioni, once you give people the language around this, they kind of intuitively know that this stuff goes on, or is present, or is missing, or is valued, or is not valued. Or people get acknowledged for some things and kind of get the mickey taken out of them for others. They kind of know all that stuff goes on, but they haven't got the language to put around it to figure out why it matters. And Cantor's work in this area is really quite nice to be able to do that.
So what are those roles?
So the four roles are in a team. So he labels them in a certain way. I can give you the labels. But if I explain the roles, he says that in a team you need the people that are fundamentally what we might call the idea generators, right? The people that get excited about coming up with ideas. And in fact, as soon as other people in the team get engaged in those ideas, the idea generator is already fed up with it and wants to come up with the next idea. So they tend to be the first people that speak. They tend to be the loudest people. They tend to be the people that occupy the most airtime, right? But they're important because they're the idea generators. Then you get another category of people who are, what they're fundamentally doing is they're testing to destruction the ideas that are being generated by the other category of people, right? So these tend to be people that lead with questions rather than lead with answers, but they're seeking answers. This is the key. But in order to test something, you ask questions. So you've got the idea generator who's coming up with all these, what they think are wacky and wonderful and crazy and fantastic ideas. And they're coming up against this other group of people that are, at the very earliest opportunity, questioning those ideas. But the team needs that, because you want to make sure as a team you're only taking forward the very best ideas.
Yep.
And you need to test them in order to establish that. So you've got a group of idea generators in a team. You need them. That's where your ideas are coming from. You've got a group of people who are testing those ideas. You need them because you want to make sure only the best thought through ideas are taken forward.
Yep.
You've got all that going on in an immediate dynamic. So what you also need is people within the team who can bring a broader perspective, who can bring some thinking that is outside the immediacy of that conversation, who can bring different ways of thinking, who can bring past examples, who can bring different contexts into that very dynamic conversation that's happening between the idea generator and the thought tester. You need that external, perspective being brought into the room. Fundamental group of people. Now at this stage, you've got ideas, you've got the testing of ideas, you've got perspective, but you've not actually got any action. So what a team also needs is people that can get stuff done.
Yep.
Get stuff done. And it's this combination of these four fundamentals that not just need to be present in a team, but need to be valued in a team.
Yep.
Your perspective bringer might only say one or two things in an entire meeting. Mm-hmm. But what they say changes the direction of conversation or takes it to a much deeper level.
Yep.
But they tend to be the quietest people in the room, right? And so what many teams do is they dismiss these people. Right? They dismiss them because they see them as the quiet person in the corner who hardly ever speaks. They don't really contribute much. Right?
Don't add value. Yeah.
Once you start to understand the behavioural roles, their purpose isn't to be bouncing off the walls. Their purpose isn't to be rah-rah-rahing it through a meeting. Their purpose is to be thoughtful, to be reflective, to bring that perspective and to deliver that one killer contribution. That's their role. That's their behavioural role within a team.
Yeah.
And teams at their peril dismiss these people. Right? That second category of people, that idea tester, can get a bad reputation in a team.
Yeah.
Oh my God, there goes Rohit again. We're coming up with all these great ideas, and all he ever does, oh my God, he's full of doom and gloom. All he ever does is question things. Why can't he just go along with a really great idea? He's always bringing us down. That's his role within the team. He's not doing it to poo-poo an idea. He's doing it to make sure to pressure test that idea is robust, it's thought through, it's bomb-proof, it's the right one to take forward. Now, the link back to Lencioni. If I understand that that's his behavioural contribution to this team, then I trust his intention, right, is to pressure test ideas, not to be the doom and gloom merchant in the team. If trust is in place, then the power of that role it can flourish. So you start to see now the behavioural roles, the way that Cantor thinks about it, and the way that Lencioni thinks about it are fundamentally connected. And that gives you the identikit that you need to be high performing. You need the pyramid elements, but you need the behavioral roles also.
Yeah, that's exactly what as you were saying that, I was thinking that you need the trust and the ability to have that conflict and work through it. And then by having these behavioral roles that you're describing, when that conflict arises, because there's trust, these roles are not considered to be anti anything. They're understood and, as you said, valued. And so because the intention is clear, right? And then with that clarity of intention, like, okay, you've got the best interest. Now, often, this has been all through my career, I've always sort of said, whenever I've gotten into a sticky situation, I always sort of go back to what's the right thing for the company, because then it sort of takes me away, and that clarifies my intention for everyone in the room who may misunderstand it, right? In fact, clarifies it for myself. And so why I bring that up is that intention piece that I know we brushed past it, but it is a key to that connective tissue being built. But one question I had for you regarding these behaviors is, I was smiling while you were saying it, because I can think of certain types, and not to put people in boxes or titles, but certain types of functions or people who would suit certain roles more than others would. And so, two-part question: do these roles, do people naturally self-select into these roles? Or is it the job of the team leader in a high-performing team, or with the ambition to build a high-performing team, to identify those who would play these roles? So how does that actually happen in real life?
Yeah, it can be a bit of a mismatch, right? So we all have our default. We all have our behavioural default. And we usually show up in two of the four roles. One very predominantly, and one as a secondary, and then we're usually not the other two. That's just human behaviour, right?
Yeah.
So it can very often be that teams have all four roles present, and their blocker to moving to high performance is not that they don't have the roles naturally present, it's that they don't value them. And therefore the full power of all four roles isn't being played out. So that can very often be one scenario. But another scenario is, let's say as a CEO, you've recruited your top talent team, right? And that's been based on their experience, their skill, their ability in their if I can put it this way, their departmental positions, right? And from that, they will have a certain set of default behavioral role contributions in the way that we're describing. And it may well be that some roles are underplayed. That doesn't mean that you need to get rid of somebody and recruit somebody else into the team, right?
Yeah.
But it means that with that awareness, you have to figure out, how do we boost more of the role that we may be lacking in, right? We've got lots of idea generators, but we've not got enough people that are able to test those ideas to destruction. But we've got a few people who play that role secondarily. It's not their default role, but they've got the ability to do it. Right, as a leader, how do I encourage that? How do I empower that? How do I build their skill in that? How do I build their confidence to speak out and to deploy that skill? So it's not about having to change the team because the behavioural role is not there. The capability for the behavioural role will be there. I guarantee it. Yeah. It will be there. It might need some nurturing.
I would almost, if I may add one more thing, I think to your point, it's tied to what you were saying, which is, having the awareness of who has which role implicitly to their strengths, that who can play, but may or may not be exhibiting those. But the other part of that is also who are preventing, other people from speaking. So one thing I can imagine is the idea generation folks may, given that they will take the most airtime and are obviously passionate about their ideas, may also be the people who have strong opinions and therefore, for example, and it's hypothetical, but I can imagine, I'm thinking of a few people who may stifle the ones who are more around that sort of broader perspective, who are the quieter ones who are reflecting on the conversation and trying to get in at the right time. And so part of the leadership, again, we'll talk more about this in the how to be a great leader episode, but part of it's also sort of understanding, I think, what you're saying, and allowing, as much as it is to allow people or to encourage people to speak, is also to manage those who may be speaking and are not allowing that to happen. So it's this managing the dynamic, which is why I guess leadership is a privilege, and you've got to earn it in the room.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you know, I often think in that scenario, the analogy that I find useful is, at that moment, as the leader, I am the conductor.
Yeah.
And my team is the orchestra. And if my violins are being drowned out by my brass section, what am I going to do about that? Correct. Right? I may need to do one of or both of. I may need to just quieten the brass section a little bit, right? Or I may need to have the violins play a little bit louder, or I might need to do both. Yeah. But as a leader, that's one of the things that I need to be aware of. I need to be purposefully conscious about that. Yeah. Are my perspective bringers being heard? Yeah. I may need to coach them to have more confidence to speak up, to break into the conversation. I may need to coach my idea generators. I don't want to lose the power of what they bring, but I need them to help me create space for my perspective bringers, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, and the last thing I would say on this, David, is that I've actually gone through, like, I was reflecting on myself, and I've never been the ideas generation person, but across the other three, I've played a role. And I think as people go through their career, they may start at one place and end up in a different place, partly because of the exposure they've had or what they enjoy. You know, and so I can imagine a lot of consultants listening into this conversation, or former consultants, may identify themselves as those who are questioning the ideas and checking the validity and looking at the data and really filtering it out. Whereas a lot of operators might be the ones saying, hey, look, I'm the get it done person,
Yeah.
right? And I know how to get it done. That said, the get it done person may change in a few years to be the perspective person because they've had it done so many times. They're like, I can see this movie play out, and let me wait for everyone to finish their thoughts, and I can just say, hey, but what about this? So there is
Yes.
an evolution also within the humans to kind of change, and that's also part of the leader to say, hey, look, who's playing what role now, and would that change over time? Especially going back to the beginning of our conversation, we're solving for the long term. We're solving for that long term, high performing leadership team that continues to thrive. And so that's really it.
The performance equals potential minus interferences. Most of us, when we stand on that tee, what we see is the forest, the bunkers, and the lake. We see our fears. The professional golfer sees the flag. It's mind management. That's what makes, on the individual level, the difference between those that are good or great and those that are truly distinctive. The more aware you are, the more choice you have to react in a different way next time it happens.
Subscribe to the People Quotient channel, where leadership meets action. Powerful conversations with practical insights that you can use right now. See you in the next episode.